Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, at Inquisition Update to continue our reading and discussion of the book The Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson. Before we begin where we left off last time, I want to reiterate that the temporal power of the Pope had been delivered 3 near-fatal blows. The first was the Protestant Reformation, stripping the papacy of his temporal power, putting Christ on his rightful throne, restoring the Scriptures to the hands, the possession of God's people. And a natural result of that was separation of church and state. The church had its role, but the state had a separate role, and no longer should the Pope control the governmental or civil affairs of nations. No longer was he able to command kings to oppress people. Next came the suppression of the Jesuits, which implies that there were no longer this militia of the Pope to shore up the bond between church and state. No longer were the Jesuits able to extend the papacy's domain, or at least that's the public image, that the suppression of the Jesuits stripped the papacy of his strident rowers of the papal bark, and the Pope's New World Order came to a screeching halt. And then we have Napoleon, a revolution with the motto of liberty, fraternity, and fraternity, further liberating the people. And as a result of these 3 near-fatal blows, the Jesuits got together with the monarchs of the world and the papacy and created a holy alliance to restore monarchism in the rebellious nations of the world, most of which were Catholic nations. Now, we'll continue on page 258 of this book, the last full paragraph, talking about the French Revolution. It says, the appearance of Napoleon had alarmed the hereditary sovereigns. He had succeeded in striking what they feared would be a fatal blow at the doctrine of the divine right and hereditary descent of royal powers. Now, reminding my new listeners that the whole idea of the divine right of kings, this thing we colloquially refer to as the blue bloods, who always seek positions of power in the world, they get their power, they derive their power from the belief that the papacy is the replacement of the Son of God on earth, and that the Pope has the voice of God on earth, and that all the kings of the earth must obey him, and together they rule over the people. Okay, during the Protestant Reformation, this was rejected. The divine right of kings was largely rejected, putting Christ on his rightful throne, as we said before. The suppression of the Jesuits advanced the Protestant view by suppressing, depriving the monarchs, the blue bloods, of the militia that promoted their power in the world. And then we have the French Revolution, which also was in favor of popular government and overthrowing this monarchical system which foundation was the papacy. Now, Napoleon had scattered governments and destroyed dynasties with reckless audacity in order to build up new governments and dynasties obedient to himself. The reigning monarchs were dismayed at the rapidity and success of his movements, being unable to anticipate when and where his quick and decisive blows would strike. But when his star waned, they again applied their united energies to the revival of their claim of divine right and to a closer union of church and state. So whenever you hear the terms divine right, you know what they're talking about is a union of church and state, putting the church in its position of ultimate authority and the state the servant of the Roman Catholic Church and the papacy. So the divine right literally means the union of the Roman Catholic Church and the state or the governments of the world. Now, they could not fail to see that monarchism was threatened with defeat unless some agencies could be discovered whereby the unwary populations who were striving after freedom could be brought back again into the net which the papacy and the secular monarchs had spent centuries in weaving. These terrified sovereigns were seemingly relieved from their embarrassing fears when Pope Pius VII ventured to bring to their aid what he intended should be the whole power of the Church by restoring life to the dissolved Society of Jesus. So he's going to reinstitute the Jesuits, those faithful rowers of the papal bark, and they're going to unite church and state once again. They're going to defeat the Protestant Reformation, and they're going to defeat Napoleon and freedom. He says they must have rejoiced as drowning men do when seizing upon some object that saves them. The Jesuit spirit did not need to be revived, for it had never been suppressed, and therefore they reappeared fully panapolied for the renewal of the battle against civil and religious liberty, the popular right of self-government, and all the beneficent influences of the Protestant Reformation. Hang on one second. Okay, better connection this time. My apologies to my listeners. Now we'll continue. I want to reiterate before we continue what the object of all this is. This union of church and state, the reestablishment of the Jesuits, and the attempt to restore monarchical power in liberated Europe was all an attempt to destroy the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation. All of the liberties of the people came from the Protestant Reformation, from the Bible. Okay, this is a war against the Bible, the true faith of Jesus Christ, and we call it the Protestant Reformation. But the true faith of Jesus Christ has always existed, and it has always been persecuted both by the Roman Catholic Church and the states over whom she ruled. All right, this is what the papacy finds to be its most lethal enemy, the true church of Jesus Christ, the Bible, the true faith of Christ, the liberty of Christ. The papacy hopes to bind us all into complete and abject religious and temporal subservience to the papacy, and will use any means at her disposal to accomplish that end. The ultimate goal of the Jesuits and the Roman Catholic Church is a global religion, a global government, a global economic system, a global social structure designed by and for the papacy, who will rule supreme over all of it. That is the New World Order. It's simply a global reestablishment of the old world order. And what must be defeated, in order for this New World Order to succeed, to have any hope of success, the Bible and those who read it and understand it and obey it. In other words, those who have their only loyalties to Christ and will not serve two masters, these must be destroyed. Protestantism and the Bible and the liberty whereby Christ has made us free must be destroyed. Now, the hope of the destruction of Protestantism lies, at least from the papacy's point of view, in the restoration of the Jesuit order. The destruction of Protestantism, the restoration of monarchical or papal power, both in the church and in the state, is the goal of the Jesuit order. That's why the papacy knew that it must reestablish the Jesuit order. Now, sympathizing with Ferdinand IV of Naples, the most bigoted monarch in Europe, at whose instance they were restored, the Jesuits selected such points of operation as would enable them to strike their hardest blows at the freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and freedom of religious belief. Okay? They're going to begin their assault on Protestantism by destroying freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and religious belief. That's their first order of business. They can't have true Bible-believing Christians talking and writing books and holding church services and rallying Christ to his rightful throne and overthrowing these monarchical powers. They have to gather up their tongues and their presses and silence them. And that's what the Federal Communications Commission is designed to do, to suppress speech, not to give liberty of speech. And I'm as much a subject of their efforts as anyone else. They've suppressed my speech on amateur radio, and they would, if they could, suppress my speech on First Amendment Radio. I would only gather that they have not assaulted me on First Amendment Radio simply because the listenership is so few. But on amateur radio, where my signal was heard from coast to coast and from border to border on a nightly basis for as many as 8 hours an evening, reading these books and making these discussions on amateur radio, the Federal Communications Commission and the Amateur Radio Relay League turned a blind eye and a deaf ear to the overwhelming jamming that took place from Roman Catholics and Freemasons and ecumenical evangelibellies to get this information off of amateur radio. The first order of business of the Jesuits upon their restoration was to gag the people and to gag the press. And that's exactly what they're doing today, too. And there's going to be no more religious freedom in this country. It's just like, as I've said before, during the Pope Benedict XVI's visit to the United States in 2008, one of the most powerful prelates of the Roman Catholic Church in this country stood before the EWTN cameras on satellite television and declared to the Catholic watchers of that program that there is no such thing as freedom of religion. Now, in a free Protestant country, those words are anathema. They are a threat to the liberties of this country. But because of religious freedom in this country, Roman Catholic prelates are free to make statements like that and to incite the Roman Catholic populations of this country and the ecumenical evangelibellies in support of the Roman Catholic Church and its power and government simply tolerate this and seem to think that this must be God's will, that there should be no freedom of religion in America. And they're going to make this country Christian, but it's not going to be Christianity at all. It's going to be Roman Catholicism, the Antichrist religion, the synagogue of Satan. And if they don't open their eyes before long, this will be an oppressed nation like no other in the history of the world. Religious persecution will be government sanctioned, government operated. The days of the Dark Ages will return to the Enlightened Age right here in the United States of America. If people cannot foresee by a review of history what the Jesuits have planned for this country, what the papacy has planned for this country, if they do not see it and they do not rebel against it, it's a done deal. Now, you won't hear many others of the press, particularly the mainstream press, and even the alternative media in this country talking about these things. They're simply ignorant about it. But we're not ignorant of these things here at Inquisition Update. God has brought Inquisition Update as another avenue for the truth to be heard about this new world order and what God's people have in store if they do not restore Christ to his rightful throne. He says, sympathizing with Ferdinand IV of Naples, the most bigoted monarch in Europe, at whose instance the Jesuits were restored, the Jesuits selected such points of operation as would enable them to strike their hardest blows at the freedom of speech, of the press, and of religious belief, well knowing that if these were allowed, they gave birth to the principle of popular self-government where it did not exist previously, and strengthened and maintained it where it did. They were encouraged by all who supported the alliance between the papacy and the allied sovereigns upon the ground that the parties to that alliance were endeavoring to keep church and state united as the only certain guarantee for preserving monarchism. They were consequently accepted as co-workers in the cause of absolute imperialism and the enemies of every form of government where the people possess the right of sovereignty. Now you can take all of that verbiage and condense it into this. It was an alliance between the monarchs of Europe and the supreme monarch of the world, the Pope of Rome, against Bible-believing, Jesus-loving, and obeying people. It's an unholy alliance, stirred up by the Jesuits, who were never suppressed. They just went underground. And they united once again the sovereigns of Europe, the monarchs of Europe under the authority of the papacy, and they decided to strike a blow against the Protestant Reformation and all the liberties that came out of it. It says the flag under which they marched had upon it all the symbols of despotism and no room for a single star to indicate the light of modern progress and development. That's right, progress and development resulted from the Protestant Reformation. It made the deprived and depraved Roman Catholic world look ridiculous in comparison. It replaced true Bible Christianity for Roman Catholic superstition, squalor, and filth, moral depravity, and poverty. And the papacy had to destroy the Protestant Reformation. The Jesuits had to destroy the Protestant Reformation. The monarchs, if they were ever to rule again and to enjoy all the privileges of that union of church and state, they had to destroy Protestantism. It says then, having thus reached again a condition of apparent security, they were attracted to Rome by the patronage of the papacy, and the value of their alliance was recognized by the papal authorities, as may be seen in the fact that they had restored to them their property which Clement XIV had confiscated, together with the Roman and German colleges at Rome, and a number of churches. So the Jesuits, after their restoration, were strengthened by the papacy, which restored to them everything that they had lost at the time of their suppression. All their material goods, all their schools, which is absolutely necessary for the Jesuits. They must, in order to succeed in their global aims, they must have control of the education of children and young people. Okay? Now he says they became more powerful than ever in the states of the church. In other words, the papal states, and succeeded in bringing all Italy under the dictatorship of their general, the Jesuit general, except Sardinia and Piedmont, where, in order to avoid a direct breach with the Pope, they were tolerated but not installed. They moved about through Europe openly where they could do so safely, and secretly where they could not, rejoicing when they witnessed the triumph of monarchism over the rights of the people. The Jesuits always rejoice every time monarchism wins a battle over liberty of the people. He says, wheresoever a battle was to be fought against these rights, they always aided and encouraged the cause of political despotism. If in the contest of that period a single Jesuit could have been found in the ranks of the people, except to betray them, he would have been anathematized by his society. Okay? There's another explicit statement by this author, R.W. Thompson, that the Jesuits are against the liberties, the popular liberties demanded by the people. Wherever a Jesuit has an opportunity to trample the rights of the people, the liberties of the people, all brought forward from the Protestant Reformation, every time a Jesuit has a potential to trample those rights, he empowers the monarchy. Global monarchy is the goal. So every opportunity to suppress the people and to put them in bonds of chains, to make them subservient to the state and thereby to make them subservient to the Vatican, that's what the Jesuits do. It says, if in the contests of that period a single Jesuit could have been found in the ranks of the people, except to betray them, he would have been anathematized by his society. Now, the reintroduction of the Jesuits into Spain teaches a lesson which should not be forgotten. The king, Ferdinand VII, proved himself to be one of the most faithful of their royal pupils. After he had succeeded in becoming freed from the grasp of Napoleon and returned to his kingdom, he found an existing constitution by which the Spanish people, in his absence, had placed wholesome limitations upon the royal power. In other words, while the king was away, the people demanded liberty and formulated a constitution which placed limits on the monarchical power structure. And it also placed limits on the Jesuits because they kicked them out, remember? And it also placed limits on the papacy. No longer could the papacy dictate the civil laws of the country. That's real liberty. It's liberty in Christ. We'll be back right after this.
Years ahead of the dominant media, FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
100 days, 100 subscribers at $7 will bring FirstAmendmentRadio.com to the minimum level necessary to sustain it through 2015. Go to support.FirstAmendmentRadio.com. $7 a month. Really, you can afford that for our Protestant First Amendment rights and the gospel of the kingdom message. Where your heart is, there will your treasure be also. Go to support.FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Have you seen the Left Behind movies? Have you read the Left Behind fictional book series. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. Because they see the world stage shaping to fulfill what they have been led to believe is sound biblical interpretation, a left behind rapture scenario, this false view of prophecy is reinforced in the mind, not only of its adherents, but also includes those who have been merely exposed to the specific media. Is it possible that false prophecy can be fulfilled? The rapture theories have always been in dispute. Pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib disputes have risen up in exclusively evangelical circles of recent history, so that when true believers don't suddenly disappear, this element will easily go by the wayside when all see a new Jewish temple begin to be built. Will this be part of the great delusion that will come upon the whole earth? It seems that this great prophetic delusion has already overcome practically the entire American evangelical and Christian world. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. To learn more, visit crosstheborder.org. That's CROSS, crosstheborder.org.
Record budget deficits, bankruptcies galore, and the U.S. dollar is at an all-time low. With today's gloomy economic outlook, safe investments are often hard to find. For over a decade, Melody Cedarstrom at Discount Gold and Silver Trading Company has been helping people secure their future by investing in the precious metals. Melody has the honesty, integrity, and experience that is often lacking in the precious metals business. Let her put it to work for you. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 800-375-4188. That's 800-375-4188.
Okay, welcome back to Inquisition Update. We're talking about the reestablishment of the Jesuits in Spain. Spain, a Roman Catholic country that was never friendly to Protestantism, a model Roman Catholic country, tyrannized by the papacy and the Jesuits, was liberated by Napoleon. And during the absence of the king, who was under suppression by Napoleon, they took the opportunity, being freed from the Jesuits, being freed from the papacy, to establish their own constitution, to establish rights for the people. You know, when the cat's away, the mice will play. Although Protestantism had never been powerful in Spain, the Roman Catholic people desired liberty, and they got it during the Napoleonic Wars. It says the reintroduction of the Jesuits into Spain teaches a lesson which should not be forgotten. The king, Ferdinand VII, proved himself to be one of the most faithful of their pupils, the faithful to the Jesuit, faithful student of the Jesuits, right? After he had succeeded in becoming freed from the grasp of Napoleon and returned to his kingdom in Spain, he found an existing constitution by which the Spanish people, in his absence, had placed wholesome limitations upon the royal power. Okay, they placed limitations upon this divine right monarchy that ruled Spain. And it says, with a view to regain possession of authority, he made a solemn pledge that he would obey this constitution and see that it was enforced. Having succeeded, he proved by his subsequent conduct that he was thoroughly conversant with and wholly approved the Jesuit doctrine that a monarch is not bound by any promise made to his subjects or by any oath to obey it, because his authority is divine, and the people possess no rights which he does not of his own accord concede to them. All right, this is one of the defining characteristics of a papal monarch. This king, Ferdinand VII, upon returning to Spain and finding this constitution that placed limitations on his power, deceitfully led the people to believe that he would uphold those liberties and remain within the constraints of that constitution. But he knew when he made those concessions to the people that he was not bound to obey them, because the papacy absolves any king, any monarch, any papal monarch sharing the divine right of the Pope to rule the people is not bound by any oath and is automatically absolved from any promises he makes to uphold any constitution that limits the papal power or the divine right, royal power. So he paid lip service to the people, knowing full well that at the first opportunity he would restore the monarchical system and again oppress the Spanish people. He says, having succeeded, he proved by his subsequent conduct that he was thoroughly conversant with and wholly approved the Jesuit doctrine that a monarch is not bound by any promise made to his subjects or by any oath to obey it, because his authority is divine, and the people possess no rights which he does not of his own accord concede to them. Consequently, when safely in possession of the throne, the Jesuit emissaries crowded about his court to dictate his policy and pardon his perjury. He traitorously proceeded to abolish the courts, the legislative body of the nation, and grasp the scepter of absolute government in his own hands. In other words, he betrayed the people. And that's typical of every monarchical, divine right, papal government. Just as much a defining characteristic of this Spanish King Ferdinand VII and our own papal monarchy in Washington, D.C. They are not bound by any oath to the people. Everyone in this country knows that a politician will promise you the moon to get elected and then turn against the people. Always, continually, we are losing our rights in this country. Why? Because they are restoring a monarchical system, a new world order, a global monarchical papal system. Ferdinand VII restored the infamous Inquisition, and the cruelty of his despotism was exhibited in the number of victims who suffered death during his reign of terror. How much a monarch should have enjoyed the favor and protection of Pius VII, the head of the Church, almost passes intelligent comprehension. How he had the approval of the Jesuits is well understood. His enormities became so great at last that the Roman Catholic people of Spain, weary of his persecutions and realizing that the nation could not live unless they were arrested, resorted to revolution to avenge wrongs they could endure no longer, and proclaimed a constitutional form of government whereby they guaranteed such popular rights as they deemed essential to their own welfare. It took revolution to overthrow this papal monarchy in Spain, and it was done by Roman Catholic people. And that's why I've said, and much to many people's chagrin, that if there's any hope for the United States of America, if history is any indication, it's going to be the Roman Catholic people that are finally going to rise up against this papal monarchy in Washington, D.C., and kick the Jesuits again out of this country like Spain did, and proclaim liberty to the people, liberty of the press, liberty of speech, and liberty of religion in this country. Our government, under the influence of the Jesuits, are trying to restore monarchism, Roman Catholicism, as the national religion of this country, and Catholics aren't even going to like it. The Catholics in Spain didn't like it. The Catholics in France didn't like it. The Catholics in Germany didn't like it. The Catholics in England didn't like it. No place in the world have Roman Catholics ever enjoyed a perfect union of church and state in their Roman Catholic countries. They were tolerant to allow the papacy to be the head of the church, but they did not want him to have anything to do with the civil authorities. They wanted the church and the state separated. And while all the Roman Catholic countries of Europe liberated themselves from this monarchical power, the United States is reuniting with it. A Protestant nation. How could it be? It defies comprehension that the American people would tolerate such a monarchical form of government in Washington, D.C., totally irresponsible to the wishes of the people and making us depend for every vital need of the people upon the government. Health care? Why do we want the government to be in control of health care in this country? What liberties will remain if everything that we need to survive in this country must be handed to us from the government? Where is the Protestant notion of independence, self-sufficiency? Where is any Protestant notion that the people are the vessels of the Holy Spirit, that God's law is written in our heart, that we are the only ones to judge, to properly judge what is right and what is wrong in this country? And if we were ever going to unite church and state in this country, it would be Christ sitting on the throne. And the Word of God would be our law. We would not put the Pope on the throne of this country, nor would we put Roman Catholic canon law as our law. That's Antichrist. Do you want to know why you're enslaved in this country? Because you're trying to serve two masters. You profess Christ out of one side of your mouth, but you support the papal government. And to confuse the issue, they divided the government into left and right, liberal versus conservative, Republican and Democrat, and you think the war is all about left versus right, when it's not at all. The war is between Christ and Antichrist. And both left and right, liberal and conservative, Democrat and Republican, both serve the papacy. None of them serve Jesus Christ. None of them uphold our Christian liberties. They want to govern the people. They want to be the ones to redistribute the wealth by overtaxing all the people, taking from the righteous and giving to the wicked. They strengthen the wicked in this country. Those who won't work, those who are dependent upon drugs and other forms of vice and are not productive in this world, they wish to redistribute your wealth, your hard-working, Christian, Bible-believing wealth, to those who have no hope in this world and are bringing this country down. They serve the papacy. The papacy wants to bring this country down, to make us dependent for our every need upon the government which serves the papacy. That's what Rome would do to the whole country and the whole world. That's the New World Order. He says his enormities became so great. Ferdinand VII, his enormities became so great at last that the Roman Catholic people of Spain, weary of his persecutions and realizing that the nation could not live unless they were arrested, resorted to revolution to avenge wrongs they could no longer endure, and proclaimed a constitutional form of government whereby they guaranteed such popular rights as they deemed essential to their own welfare. But the Jesuits were present to counsel the perjured king, and accepting their casuistical teachings as his guide, he assented to this new constitution, and by the representation of his solemn promise to observe it, turned away the popular vengeance. Thus he gained time to renew his royal strength, and when he subsequently found the nation seemingly slumbering in a sense of security, again stamped his foot upon the Constitution, reassumed his arbitrary authority as king by divine right, independently of the people, forfeited his honor by repeating his perjury, and plunged Spain once again into the deepest misery. It took a revolution to liberate Spain. And when this King Ferdinand came back to the country, he promised the people to maintain all their liberties. And once he regained power, he reneged on all of it, because the Pope gives him divine right to violate his oaths. The papacy gives divine right to these kings to perjure themselves, to swear oaths they know they are not going to keep. You know, the President of the United States, when he swears an oath to preserve, protect, and defend our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, he has absolutely no intent to do so, and has every intent to do as his Jesuit handlers dictate, to govern by divine right, being absolved of his oath by the papacy, and to take away those rights, even if they have to stage a 9/11 type event to warrant it. That's the reality in the United States of America. The people have no say. And the people have no understanding of what is really going on. It's appalling that we have all of this history that we read here on Inquisition Update. Example after example after example of Jesuit intrigue. And we don't see it happening here in this country the very same way it happened in Spain, France, Portugal, Germany, England, the Netherlands, India, China, Japan, every nation where a Jesuit ever set his foot. And here we are in Protestant America, so-called Protestant America, Jesuits free to come and go from the White House, from the Congress, from Capitol Hill, from the Supreme Court, all upholding Roman Catholic canon law, all running their counter-reformation operations, and hardly anybody in this country is aware of it. It's sometimes I feel like I'm talking to thin air. It would be so. Look, Spain did it. France did it. Portugal did it. All the Roman Catholic countries did it. They kicked the Jesuits out and demanded that they never return. And they got control of their governments. And they established constitutions that upheld their liberties. What's wrong with the United States of America? The King of Spain, this perjured tyrant, was cursed by the Roman Catholic people of Spain, and his enormities drove the Roman Catholic populations of Spanish America to assert their independence. That's right, it didn't just affect Spain. This revolution of the people of Spain didn't just affect Spain. It also affected the Spanish countries in South America, who followed their example and established their own constitutions. Many of those constitutions still exist today, and the papacy fights every stinking one of them. He says, when he had the royal power in his hands, he brought the Inquisition and the Jesuits back to Spain. Oppression, torture, starvation, stretching the people on the rack. putting them in dungeons. That's what you get when you get a papal government. That's what you get when you fail to resist the papacy's control of the government. The Inquisition and the Jesuits were brought back to Spain. When the people were unable to enforce the Constitution, they drove the Jesuits out of the country. When the people have liberty, they drive the Jesuits out of the country. That's what they did in France, Portugal, Spain, Germany, England. Whenever the people had liberty, they drove the Jesuits out of the country. Why? Because they knew that there was no greater threat to their liberties than the presence of the Jesuits within their country. They recognized the Jesuits as the gravest threat against liberty. What is wrong with America? When the king had the royal power in his hands, he brought the Inquisition and the Jesuits back to Spain. When the people were unable to enforce the Constitution, they drove the Jesuits out of the country. He knew his friends, and the people knew their enemies. But with all the infamies of his conduct resting upon him, he was favored and applauded by Pope Pius VII and venerated by the Jesuits. The contemporaneous events are full of instruction. The contemporaneous events are full of instruction. Do you suppose the American people would ever advantage themselves by this instruction? To accomplish the objects announced at Vienna, remember the unholy alliance between the Pope and the monarchs who had been unseated by the Protestant Reformation and by the French Revolution? They got together and decided, hey, we're going to be utterly destroyed if we don't overthrow this trend toward liberalism and liberty. It says, to accomplish the objects announced at Vienna, the Holy Alliance met again in Congress at Verona, where the sovereigns pledged themselves in the most solemn form that they would continue to prevent the establishment of popular governments and would unite all their energies in preserving monarchical institutions where they existed and to reestablish them where they had been set aside by the people. All right, now here, R.W. Thompson gives us a note. Now listen to this. He said, this gave rise to what is known as the Monroe Doctrine, which declares that the United States will consider it threatening to their own independence if European governments shall interfere with that of any of the American states. Did you know the Monroe Doctrine was written and established by this country as a result of the union of the church and state in Europe, the papacy and his alliance with the royal powers of Europe to overthrow all forms of popular government where they exist and to maintain the monarchical system where they existed? Our government responded to this. And nowhere was it mentioned that the papacy was at the very root and cause of this holy alliance. It just simply stated that this country would defend itself if threatened by any European government. Even in the Monroe Doctrine, they protected the papacy. Our government is fearful of the papacy. Were I President of the United States at that time, having been given this information of what occurred at Verona and Vienna, I would have named the papacy as being the gravest threat to our Protestant constitutional republic and our liberties. I would have named the Jesuits as being the most grave threat to our Protestant liberties and freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religious belief. Our government at that time, even in the writing of this Monroe Doctrine, failed to educate the people about where the greatest threat was coming from. But our government knew that this holy alliance between the papacy and the royal powers of Europe was a threat. So they issued the Monroe Doctrine. They never told me this in high school, that the Monroe Doctrine was as a result of a union between church and state in Europe, which had its intent and purpose to destroy all popular governments everywhere in the world that they exist, and especially the United States of America, which was seen by the papacy and all the royal powers as being the very root and cause of all the rebellion in Europe. That Europe was simply following the example of the United States of America, bringing liberty to the people and dethroning the monarchs, the papal monarchs, and thereby dethroning the papacy. You see what advantage and power the Protestant Reformation gave to this country? So much liberty and freedom that the papacy saw it, our government, our form of government and constitution, as its most lethal threat, its most lethal enemy. They organized free congresses in order to defeat popular government and restore monarchism, and the Jesuits were the orchestrators of all three of those conferences. It says the adoption of a constitution by Spain was considered in conflict with this decision at Verona, and preparations were at once made to defeat it. King Louis XVIII of France, as one of the allied sovereigns who had undertaken to preserve monarchism and defeat all popular governments at every hazard, marched an army into Spain for the sole purpose of subduing the people and setting the Constitution aside, so that the state of things that had so long existed under Ferdinand VII should continue. It was this unnatural and unjust war that carried back the Inquisition and the Jesuits to Spain. Nothing could have been more grateful to the Jesuits, because they thought they could see in it the triumph of monarchism over the people. They followed this army of invasion with as much delight as famishing people go to a feast, that they exulted when it succeeded in overthrowing the Constitution, and when they saw the feet of the perfidious Ferdinand VII upon the necks of the Spanish people, no reader of history will doubt. Victory over the people, that's what Jesuitism is. Tyranny, oppression, inquisition, divine right monarchy, that's what they want for the whole world. We'll continue on Inquisition Update tomorrow. Email me, tom@seawaves.us. Are you listening? Are you learning anything from this book? I'll see you tomorrow.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter The Left Behind Paradigm of Future Events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.